We sometimes have to go back in history to talk about the importance of the right to keep and bear arms. Well, today we're going to use something that occurred 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ to use against a modern-day cardinal of the Catholic Church in Newark, New Jersey. Stay tuned. Watch me connect the dots. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of the brand new best-selling book, Disarmed, What the Ukraine War Teaches Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. Check it out. It's available on audiobook and on Kindle. All right, folks. Last week, Newark Catholic Cardinal, Cardinal Joseph Tobin, came out and has launched an appeal to Catholics to have them voluntarily voluntarily forego their Second Amendment rights. Basically, he's encouraging people not to get guns and not to carry guns and not to engage in voluntary self-defense. That's what he says. I'll put a link to the article about this down below. Specifically, what he says is, it's true that we have a Second Amendment right to bear arms, but rights always involve responsibilities. In this case, the responsibility to protect the innocent and a secure public safety and good order, okay? Now, obviously, Cardinal Tobin is unfamiliar with the importance of an armed citizenry. Now, he should be very well versed in the Bible, both the New Testament, which is the Christian Bible, as well as the Old Testament, which is the Jewish Bible, but they all kind of work together. Now, here's the thing. There's a very famous, actually it's not that famous, only a few people know about it, but I'm going to teach you this quote from the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, because it's so important to our rights, and it teaches so much, and yet it doesn't get used enough, and I'll put links to this down below. Before I get into the book of Samuel, I want to talk about a religious point of view. This is the point I often make on Twitter, and if you're not following me on @4boxesdiner, you really should, because I add additional information beyond these YouTube videos about the Second Amendment. But I always like to make the observation that God has given to us our lives, right? He gives life to us. That's the case with all religions. God giveth us our life. Now, this is a gift from God. And if it's a gift from God, it seems to me we have a duty to protect our lives. And the best way to protect our lives from evil is with firearms, to fight back. Now, this is not a view, by the way, of Mark Smith and the Four Boxes Diner, although it is my view, and I've articulated this in many occasions. There's actually a foundation for this in the Old Testament, a very specific, interesting observation. In the book of Samuel, as you know, the Bible is made up of different books. In the Old Testament, the Jewish Bible, in the book of Samuel, there's a discussion about how the Philistines, who are allegedly barbarians, you can debate that out, but the Philistines, you see, controlled what would be the geographical region of modern-day Israel. Now, the Philistines were sometimes referred to as the sea people, sometimes as barbarians, it doesn't matter. But the point is that the Philistines were kind of the bosses of the region. And one of the tributaries that they oversaw and controlled were the Hebrews, often referred to as the Israelites. Now, this is going back to about 1,000 years before the birth of Christ. Now, why am I telling you this, and why is this relevant to your Second Amendment rights and to your right to keep and bear arms today in 21st century America? The Philistines, as reported in the book of Samuel, disarmed and made it very difficult for the Israelites to be able to arm themselves to fight back. As a general matter, going all the way back to even over 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, keep in mind that if you're the lord of the area and you want to have a relationship with others where they're the serfs, they're the subjects, they're the tributes, what have you, like the Hunger Games, if you're capital city, you want to make sure that anyone that could challenge you is unarmed. You want to give them dull sides, as they say. And that's exactly what the Philistines tried to do with the Israelites or the Hebrews. Now, here is a quote, not from Mark Smith, but actually from the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. This is, again, from the book of Samuel. I'll put a link to it down below. Quote, "Not a blacksmith could be found on the whole land of Israel, because the Philistines had said, quote, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. Sometimes that language is also translated into, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. Do you hear what I just said? This is from the Old Testament. Quote, not a blacksmith could be found in the whole land of Israel because the Philistines had said, quote, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords or spears. Now to go on, it goes on to say this, so all Israel went down to the Philistines to have their plow points, mattocks, axes, and sickles sharpened. And it goes on to talk about the prices of this. Now, obviously, this is critically important because the Philistines had the power of various forms of metallurgy. So they had the ability to have, metal weapons. But when it came to the Hebrews, the Israelites at the time, they denied them the ability to have these weapons, because if the Israelites or the Hebrews came to the Philistines with weapons to make or to sharpen, the Philistines would say, no, we're not going to do it. We don't want you to have weapons. So what the Israelites did is they brought their farm instruments and had those sharpened. So in the Battle of Michmash, 1025 BC, by the way, that's before the Common Era, guess what? The Israelites fought the Philistines using these sharpened farm instruments. And they were successful, I believe, in that one battle. But there was a constant struggle between the Israelites, who were really in the role of serf subjects and so on, relative to the overlords, the Philistines. And the Philistines understand, again, the importance of disarming the Israelites, which is what they tried to do, and they wouldn't let them have weapons, and they, to the extent the Israelites wanted to sharpen farming instruments or anything like that, the Philistines insisted that they had to come to the Philistines so they could keep track of all this. So this just goes back to a reference that it appears that Newark Cardinal Joseph Tobin is unfamiliar with, because obviously the importance of armed citizens is that you cannot be oppressed. This was understood all the way back 1,000 years before, again, Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. This fact remains as true today as it was then. But it appears that the Catholic Cardinal Joseph Tobin simply doesn't understand this or care about this, because he wants Americans to voluntarily set aside our rights in order to witness the truth that only peace and never violence is the way to build a free society. But obviously, it's also stupid to think that violence cannot be used for good purposes. Because the last I checked, when I read my World War II history, just to grab an example, it seems to me that the best way to storm the beaches of D-Day for the Allied forces against the Nazis was to use a lot of violence and weapons. Kind of think that's how it worked. And I'm guessing that was the only way to defeat the Imperial Japanese, as well as Nazi Germany in World War II, was to use violence. We know that violence also solved slavery in the United States because we had the Civil War that freed the slaves. So the suggestion that violence is never a way to build a free society is simply stupid and naive and ahistorical. But I'm not surprised that Newark Cardinal Joseph Tobin missed this, because he missed the critical part of the Bible in the book of Samuel in the Old Testament, pointing out that the overlords, the bosses, the kings, if you will, the Philistines wanted to disarm the Jews, the Hebrews, the Israelites, all the way back to 1,000 years before Jesus Christ. A lesson that we should never forget here in America. Okay, folks, hope you learned a little bit something here about the book of Samuel. I'll make sure you check out that quote. Feel free to use it. I think you'll like it. And again, it really just goes to show you that tyrants and people that want to lord over you have been trying to disarm the peasants, the serfs, the subjects, going back thousands of years. This is not a new phenomenon. It's not a 20th century phenomenon. It goes all the way back to 1,000 years before the Common Era. Okay, folks, if you haven't subscribed to the Four Boxes Diner, please do so. We'll see you again soon at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.